You are interested in the unknown, the mysterious, the unexplainable. That is why you are here.
3, 2, 1.
Spook.
We are gathered here as advisors, as scientists.
The kind of place we expect a ghost to like to wander around.
Hey, we all know that we're gonna die, baby.
I'll help you. I'm something of a witch.
Welcome to Mission Spooky. I'm your fantastic host, JC. With me today, as per usual, is the Twitter queen herself, Kiki. How you doing?
It's good to be back. Good to be back. Feels like we haven't talked in weeks.
Yes, I went on a little bit of a, let's say, vacation, in quotes. Guys, I'm just going to put this in here quick. Take your mental health kind of seriously. You know, just do what you gotta do. And that's my little note. So, Kiki, have you heard there's been things going on in the world other than a pandemic? We got all kinds of stuff going on right now. And I want to say, just off the top, right now, this podcast, #BLM. We support you guys. We love you guys.
In this episode, we're going to try really hard not to curse because I want this to be a family-friendly episode for a reason.
I'll do my best. I will do my best. That's the closest to a promise you're going to get.
Hey, look, if I have to, I'm the editor too. We'll just edit it out if we make a mistake. Not a big deal. We kind of made a decision to use our focus for this, maybe this one and possibly the next few episodes are going to be about African American history in this area, which this area is very rich in African American history, as we're going to talk about today. And so we are not going to monetize this one either, because there's a lot of really important information in here. It's going to be a little bit of a longer episode. And since we're doing this bi-weekly now, hey, you know what? Longer episode for you guys. Absolutely #Black Lives Matter. We have made it pretty clear on Twitter and Instagram that we will not support anyone that is a racist piece of crap.
If you don't support Black Lives Matter, you can just leave. Just turn this podcast off and go away. I don't even care. I will lose the 3 viewers we have.
Viewers. I'm sorry. It's like, first of all, I would like to point out that we've actually gained quite a bit of followers and listeners. So whereas I did notice that a lot of our allies and other friends out there who have podcasts, and my absolute, I say favorite only because I'm like, I can't believe that somebody would get upset about this, but I especially have been following Black Girls Do Stuff podcast. And they, of course, well, they're 2 Black ladies, so they have a lot of stuff to talk about, and especially with Black Lives Matters. And of course they do, because they're Black, and this definitely affects them and their families. Duh. And they had followers who were mad at them, I guess, is maybe, or disappointed is maybe the better word, disappointed in them because they had to make things political. And I'm like, are you serious? Like, their title of their podcast is Black Girls Do Stuff. Like, why wouldn't they have an opinion on what's happening that is something that's directly affecting their community, their culture, their race, whatever you want to put it? Yeah. So anyway, very glad that we actually did not lose any listenership. We didn't lose, and we actually gained followers on Twitter and Instagram. So hey, that makes me very happy. It makes me very hopeful for the future too. So good on you guys.
Good on you. Keep supporting, keep loving.
Yeah, so we're going to switch it up just a little bit here. We're not going to have promos today or any kind of advertising today. We're just going to stick with the history, because this is probably the first of a few episodes like this. We're going to bring you a part of local history that has, and this one, there is a ghost story attached to it, but you'll have to wait for that because it's going to be at the end. And we'll start off with Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad. And then we're going to move on to Belmont Mansion and the haunting that is there. Okay, let's say this. Since we're going to be talking about Harriet Tubman today and the Underground Railroad, and those are two very historical things that I feel like everybody should probably know about. So, JC, do you know those two things? Do you know that name and do you know the events?
I know both of them, yes. Actually, I once did a ghost investigation on a house that was supposedly part of the Underground Railroad. I would like to state nothing of interest happened there, and it was very boring from a paranormal perspective. But it was cool to be able to see like where they hid people, and because it was still like in the basement. Now they had closed off some of the tunnels that like led outside into the woods. Those were collapsed, but it was still cool to kind of be in a house that's still being used that had that kind of historic substance. It was neat.
Was that a privately owned home or was that
Yes, yeah, it was somewhere in Pennsylvania. This was like 9 years ago. I can't remember everything, Kiki.
fine?
But yeah, it was privately owned. We went there. We were asked to go. Everything, well, not everything we did. We did do some public places, but yeah, it was fun just to walk around. I also once in fifth grade we went on a field trip thing. It was like an overnight camping trip, and we had to pretend that we were part of the Underground Railroad with people hunting us because they wanted us to kind of like feel what had to happen at that time. And from what I remember, being hunted by people on horses with dogs was not fun.
No.
It's almost like our history is tarnished with lots of mistakes and terrible, terrible choices that our nation has made.
And apparently continues to make. So, on that note,
I'm gonna go cry.
Harriet Tubman was the first Black historic person that I was introduced to. Same deal. When I was a child, probably third or fourth grade, we did a lot of, I guess it would have been social studies for us. We had a social studies class and we did a lot of study on Harriet Tubman. Same deal. They took us to one of the old houses that was supposedly part of the Underground Railroad. We watched a documentary about her. Yeah, I just sort of became enamored with this idea that this woman had done all these amazing things and that she was responsible for saving all these lives. So I thought it was really cool. Yeah, she is truly an amazing woman. So buckle up because we're going on the Underground Railroad. Before we get going here, I'd like to remind the audience that I lived in the South for 20 years. So the history that I'm about to discuss concerning Southern oppression of Black people is just that, history. If you're from the South now, and you find yourself getting defensive about some of this history, then you should think hard about what it is that's making you angry. The South is a beautiful place, and I have many friends that still live there. But it's time for all of us to realize that what happened in the past is directly affecting the future. I'd also remind our listeners that I was educated at a Southern university, and much of what I'm telling you today are things that I learned from classes on history of the South from Southern teachers. So please don't try to come at me with I learned revisionist, quote unquote, Northern history, because that is not the case.
I think we should save statues because that's the only place where history is taught. Only at statues. There are no books. There's no internet. There's no other forms of learning history, Kiki.
Yeah, I haven't even gotten to that yet. So, but
Well, I did. There we are. Look at me jumping ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to take a moment to kind of remind you guys of a couple of things that set the tone for history up to this point. While this country was fighting for its freedom from tyranny, there were only 7 of our founding fathers that did not own slaves.
That's 12.5% of our founding fathers did not own slaves.
Yeah. And the fact that this country couldn't decide to abolish slavery at the beginning of its own creation speaks volumes and is representative of the idea it can wait until later. Just like these past 2 weeks, as people complained through memes about protesting during COVID. Oh my God, did COVID just suddenly go away because a Black man was killed? Maybe they legitimately don't understand that Black folks have waited long enough.
Indeed.
That not even COVID was going to stop this from happening. So how can we keep asking people to wait for justice? We've all waited long enough. Let's talk about Harriet Tubman. We're going to focus on Harriet Tubman today because we are going to hopefully be hitting up as many of the houses along the Underground Railroad here in Pennsylvania. that may also have some spooky stuff attached to them. But in order to do that, to set the stage, this is going to be the longer of the episodes because we're going to be talking about Harriet up through the Civil War. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that she had to deal with that directly affected Pennsylvanians. And then we're going to end up talking about Belmont Mansion, which is supposedly haunted. All right, so Harriet was born in 1822 in Maryland, and she was born into slavery. Her given name is Araminta Ross. She was rented. Yes, that's right. In case you were not aware, slaves could be rented out to perform different tasks at other farms. So at an early age, she was rented out to another farm as a nursemaid. And every time that infant cried, she would get whipped for it, leaving her with physical and emotional scarring.
And one question here, Kiki.
Uh-huh.
Kids just sometimes cry, right?
Yeah.
So she would just get whipped.
Yeah.
For doing a job.
Yeah. When she was 12 years old, people will say that at this point it was when she probably did her first act of bravery. And she tried to step between her and a fugitive slave. The master was getting ready to throw a heavy weight at him, and he missed hitting the fugitive slave and hit her right in the head and broke open her skull at 12. From then on, she suffered from dizziness, pain, and hypersomnia for the rest of her life. Her injuries made her unfit to be rented out or sold to other slavers, and it also made her inconspicuous. And a lot of people underestimated her because of some of her, we could call them disabilities at the time. She learned how to overcome that, and, well, we all know what the result was. In 1840, her father was set free. She had found out that her owners had actually freed the entire family through their last will and testament, but new owners stepped in and refused to adhere to the will. So even if a Southerner freed their slaves through legal means, others could come in and take you because what are you going to do about it? And we'll see this again in a little while. I'm going to be teaching you guys a little bit about what Black people really had to go through as far as trying to get free in the first place. Harriet married a free Black man named John Tubman in 1844. That marriage did not go well, and he threatened to sell her further south. I'm not going to get into John Tubman right now. We're just going to stay focused on Harriet, but I did want to mention that was a threat. In 1849, she escaped to Philadelphia and became a housemaid, but she wasn't satisfied with her alone being free. She returned to Maryland shortly after to help her friends and family escape. Eventually, she guided slaves to freedom in daring nighttime runs shrouded in complete secrecy, which became known as the Underground Railroad. Fun fact, she never lost anyone traveling on the Underground Railroad. Philadelphia and Bucks County became an epicenter for safely transporting and housing former slaves in the Underground Railroad. Just as we are today, Philadelphia was a sanctuary city. There were also many allies who tried to help getting around the laws of the time and freed slaves through alternative legal means, and I will be talking about one of those situations at the end here. Harriet was an amazing and intelligent woman. How she transported Blacks from the South was pretty ingenious. She only traveled during the winter. People would stay inside their homes in the winter, and the nights were longer and darker, so they were less likely to be seen and caught. Once she made contact with escaping slaves, they would start their journey on Saturday nights because the newspapers wouldn't report their escape until Monday morning, giving her an extra night of travel before word really got out. Really smart, right?
Yes. Strategic idea. No, I was actually thinking like now that's impossible because of how instantaneous communication is. But like, yeah, because they didn't work on Sundays. Like, not even to report. I mean, at the time, criminals were running away because it was our property is running loose.
She used songs called spirituals and would change the words to let escapees know if it was safe to go forward or if they should stay back out of danger. Again, I thought that was pretty cool. So there are several famous conductors on the Underground Railroad, one being African-American William Still, who is often referred to as the father of the Underground Railroad. Still was part of the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society made of blacks and whites who opposed slavery. His office was located in Philadelphia. He was a successful businessman and historian who documented detailed information on escaped slaves that he helped move into freedom. This not only preserved the stories of what it was like to live as a slave and escape, but the information helped reunite families who had been separated. And still knew that hardship personally. He was born free, but his mother had to leave 2 of her children behind in order to escape. And that is fleshed out in his book called The Underground Railroad Records, which is very interesting. It is part of public record. So you can Google that. It's in Google Books and you can read that for free. I know Northerners like to think that they were extremely helpful in enabling slaves from the South to escape north. And generally, this is true. But here's where we're going to take a pause for a moment on Harriet's story to discuss the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. This act directly impacted both Harriet and white allies in the North. It forced Harriet to move freed slaves farther north into Canada. The act was a controversial move by the federal government and was not as a whole well received by northern states. It was seen as giving in to Southern wants and needs, in quotations, and adversely affecting slaves escaping to the North. After all, it was part of the Compromise of 1850, in which we see the northern states attempting to appease the Southerners and keep them from seceding. Southern politicians exacerbated the issue by exaggerating the number of people escaping enslavement and directly blamed Northern interference with Southern, quote-unquote, property rights. So rather than free human beings from slavery, the South demanded that the North concede certain rights so they would not secede from the Union. Basically, the same kind of folks who are complaining about looting property in the past few weeks are the same kind of folks who literally threatened the newly formed United States with leaving the Union because they wanted to own other human beings, which they equated to property.
Wait, Kiki, I heard the Civil War wasn't fought about slavery. It was only fought about states' rights.
Let me get to that in a second. I got a whole thing about that. Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a moment. Because I will say, so the federal government overreaching and stepping into states' rights, the rights that are only so important when you're only talking about anything other than saving people's lives. So they decided that this act would abolish slaves from escaping north and thus the Union could stay together. So what was the act exactly? Well, if you were a black slave and you had been free for years in the North, all it would take was one person to claim that they owned you, and that was it. You were back to being a slave. Since a suspected slave was not eligible for a trial, the law resulted in kidnapping and conscription of free blacks into slavery, as suspected fugitive slaves had no rights in court and could not defend themselves against accusations either. Now, if all of this sounds familiar, it's because we're still fighting this right now. For example, murder by police officers is a sentence without a trial and without a jury. And I'd like to point out a few other things right here too. Historical facts, if you will, that are mostly overlooked in our school history books, depending on what state you live in. One is the fact that this is in the middle of what we call the events leading to the Civil War. So when someone tries to tell you that the Civil War wasn't about slavery, they are historically incorrect. I've often heard this conflict referred to as the War of Northern Aggression by people who just don't want to admit that their ancestors were directly involved with the oppression of an entire people. Another fact, city police officers were often used to round up free slaves in the North after this act was put into law. An example of a warning that was posted by white allies read, "Caution, colored people of Boston. One and all, you are hereby respectfully cautioned and advised not to converse with the watchmen and police officers of Boston. For since the recent order of the mayor and aldermen, they are empowered to act as kidnappers and slave catchers, and they have already been actually employed in kidnapping and catching and keeping slaves. Therefore, if you value your liberty and the welfare of the fugitives among you, shun them in every possible manner. As so many hounds on the track of the most unfortunate of your race, keep a sharp eye out for kidnappers and keep a top eye open. That's posted April 24th, 1851.
That's crazy.
Right? It kind of reminds me of watching Twitter light up over the last few days with information as allies tried to warn their friends of where the police were and where the tear gas was being set off. This is the most primitive form of Twitter, basically, posting to let Black people know that they were in danger.
Whoa, Kiki.
Yeah.
You said tear gas is being let off? Because I've heard from very reliable people
Oh,
that
Lord.
we're not using tear gas.
Okay.
Very, very reliable people. Can I name them? No. But everyone's saying it. Everyone is saying no tear gas. So, I don't... It sounds like you're saying some fake news.
Yeah, I know that I know that you're being sarcastic. I know that. If we have any,
we're using tear gas on our own citizens who are peacefully protesting, I mean, that would be against international law, if I'm correct. Like, that would just be outrageous, and it definitely wouldn't happen here in America.
yeah, no.
Excuse me while I go cry in the corner for 17 years.
Yeah, so even though most northern states were opposed to slavery, the police in those states were employed in the capture of those who, for all intents and purposes, were already free. Can you imagine? You moved north, you managed to get free, even if a southerner freed you through a will, right? And you moved north to get away from the oppressors. Now you have a law that was put forth by the federal government that now says that even though technically you are free, somebody can capture and kidnap you. And who that person is the police officers who are supposed to be protecting you can now capture you, kidnap you, and conscript you. And your children who may have been born free are now slaves in the South. This is exactly why the current feelings on the police and police brutality, they run extremely and historically deep, guys. But now the good news is
We solved racism? Is that the good news? Please tell me that's the good news.
no. Unfortunately, that's not the good news. But as with a lot of these things, because there was a slave act from 1792, a fugitive slave act from 1792, the one in 1850 made it even worse. And what happens when people try to push something to its ultimate limit, right? We're seeing it right now, again. Like, how many times have all of us, including us white allies, how many times have we said, like, can you please just stop killing Black folks? Like, can we just not do that anymore? You know? It's not really that difficult. You just don't do it. Just don't pull the trigger, you know? And we get push from a certain group of people over and over and over again. Well, that's exactly what happened here. The South did not get the expected result that they wanted. Instead, they made it worse for themselves. In Philadelphia, where once you had Northerners who were, and I'm not saying they didn't care, I'm just saying that they weren't really that interested what happened to freed slaves one way or another. Like, okay, well, they're here, they're free. It's fine. We don't have to worry about it, right? Well, now they had to worry about it. And now they were seeing these people captured and abused on the streets, their streets, every day.
And this was in Philly, you say?
Oh, this was all over. But I'm saying in Philly particular, because this is where the Underground Railroad was dropping off. Until this act happened, then we had to start pushing them further into Canada to protect them, right? So no, white Northerners were not siding with the police. They weren't siding with their mayors. They weren't siding with the federal government. Instead, all this did was bolster white allies, and some of them were quite feisty about it. And I love this one. This is my favorite. This is the kind of, when people say to me, "Oh, well, we got to be on the winning side, you got to be tough and whatever." Okay, well, let me tell you about this guy. Reverend Luther Lee, pastor of the Wesleyan Methodist Church in Syracuse, New York. He writes this in 1855. He's an abolitionist, and he says, I never would obey it. I had assisted 30 slaves to escape to Canada during the last month. If the authorities wanted anything of me, my residence was at 39 Onondaga Street, and I would admit that, and they could take me and lock me up in the penitentiary on the hill. But if they did such a foolish thing as that, I had friends enough on Onondaga County to level it to the ground before the next morning. I read that and I was like, that's an Iron Man move right there. Oh yeah? Yeah? You want to come at me for helping people escape your oppression? This is my house. This is where I live. Come at me, bro.
I will burn this county to the ground.
No, not even
Yes.
that. No, he was actually saying the opposite. He's like, the county will come rescue me. Okay? Yeah. I know enough people that they will come rescue me tomorrow morning. This place will be like your penitentiary will be in rubble and I will have escaped. Another example was just, at Pittsburgh in general, where abolitionists would organize groups of people for the sole purpose of seizure and release of any slave passing through the city. Pittsburgh, another sanctuary city, obviously, for blacks, and getting them back into Canada as quickly as possible. Of course, there were Northerners who didn't oppose the act. And I bet you're wondering who those people would be.
I am wondering very much.
Well, they were wealthy business owners who formed the Union Safety Committee, which sounds so nice, but really it was just because they didn't want to lose any money from Southern businesses. Once again, money and property before the lives of people. Sounds very familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
This isn't a conspiracy either. Like, you can Google this stuff. You can read it on Wikipedia, or you can read it in any book that isn't censored in an attempt to rewrite history. And that is why I tell you guys it's important to learn your history. Now, we're going to get into the Civil War here in a minute, so I'm going to tell you that there was another act that followed, and it was called the Confiscation Act, which was passed by Congress at the beginning of the Civil War. And its main purpose was to free slaves still held by Confederate forces in the South. Slavery was an important issue going into the Civil War, so much so that the Union passed an act specifically to free slaves during the war. So do not come at me with states' rights. No, it was about property rights and the rights of Southerners who wanted to have property that were people. That's it.
As I usually say to people that say it was about states' rights, I say states' rights to own people. That's what it was about. The right of certain citizens in certain states to own people, other human beings.
I'm going to get into a little bit about plantation life here too in a second. And I kind of understand why specifically Southerners, Southern families who've been here for a very long time, who actually fought in the Civil War. None of my ancestors were even here. I'm only third generation in this country. I have no dog in this fight whatsoever. Yeah, I'm kind of, when it comes to the Revolutionary War, like I said in one of our episodes before, my family was half for Britain and the other half still in Britain was still for the Americans, because they thought it was better to not have to own the American colonies. So, yeah, I got no stake in the Civil War whatsoever. It just pisses me off when I would hear certain people tell me that they believe that that slavery had nothing to do with the Civil War, and I'm like, yeah, no, you're so wrong. It's not even funny. So we're going to pick back up with Harriet now, because at the start of the Civil War, she now had her hands untied as far as transporting freed slaves into the North. So she no longer had to get them all the way up into Canada. And this is where we get to talk about what a tough lady she really was. Seeing what a win for the North would mean for the slaves having a better chance of becoming free, she joined the Union cause. I will say this, she was not initially a huge fan of Lincoln. She really expected him to say more before the start of the Civil War. And it wasn't until the Emancipation Proclamation that she really was like, okay, I'm all in. Like, this is where we have to go, because she equated the South to a snake that was just going to continually bite you until you cut its head off. I love her.
That sounds like a pretty good logic right there.
Yeah. I didn't want to go into because it's a really long quote, but the basic idea behind it was, the snake bites you and you send in a doctor to patch up that initial bite. But the problem is the snake is still in the room and now it's bitten you again. Until you get rid of the snake, it's just going to keep biting you. It doesn't matter how many times you patch up that wound, you're going to have another wound. And this is exactly what was going on with the South too. You tried to give them what they wanted. They tried to find ways around slavery. They tried to free slaves and just get them. Well, you know what? We'll just bring them up north. They can come work up here. They can earn a living. They don't have to be down there being treated like crap. I'm so that my other favorite is the whole like my family owned slave, but we were really nice to them.
You still your family first. I just as a thing. I don't believe that like there's the sins of the like. So let's say my family, in theory, let's say my family owned slaves. I don't think that makes me a bad person. If your family owned slaves, I don't think that inherently makes you a bad person because it was a long time ago. Now, if you think your family, I don't know, should still own slaves, you're definitely a bad person. If you don't think that your family's wealth is based off the fact that you like if you're not woke enough to see all the benefits you've had because your family owns slaves, well, now you're not a great person. Maybe you need to educate yourself. But just your family owning slaves at some point, I don't think that's the like. You know what? Everyone's grandfather did some crazy, or great grandfather, or great great grandfather, or what doesn't make you inherently a bad person. Just do better and do what you can to, like, make the world a better place.
If you're a Southerner and your family owned slaves way back, well, like you just said, it's just be woke enough to realize that whatever you have has probably been built in the backs of other people that you owned, okay? Not people that you paid money to. You forced them to do things for you and didn't give them a choice of what they really wanted to do with their lives.
Yeah, just be woke about it.
So back to Harriet. She winds up becoming a fixture in Port Royal, South Carolina. She helps a lot of fugitive slaves there. She acted as a nurse. She used a lot of local plants as remedies for such things as dysentery. She was actually known for being able to cure dysentery. She also did not get smallpox. She helped a lot of people who had smallpox, but she never got it herself. This is her word saying that she never got it, and then of course never had it the whole time she was working with people. And so it just added to this idea that she was blessed by God. And at this point, she was receiving food rations as if she were any other soldier in the Union Army. And that is where that little story comes in about her baking and cooking and making root beer, because she could see that the other Black folk who were now free and she was trying to help them, that they were getting a little upset that she was getting more than they were. And this is from her point of view, by the way. This was her idea, saying, I didn't want to get more than anybody else. I felt like they were going to get upset seeing that I was getting special treatment. So rather than take those extra rations, she started selling things and making root beer and making these little cakes and stuff, and then taking that money and purchasing extra food. So I thought that was pretty cool. In late 1863, she became, and I really hope that there's a lot of young Black ladies listening right now, because she became the first woman to lead an armed assault in the Civil War.
Nice.
Yeah.
What battle?
I don't want to go into the whole battle that took place for that, because it's part of the Civil War that's not happening here. This is down in South Carolina.
Okay.
But she carried a revolver with her whenever she was running the Underground Railroad, so she was no stranger to using a gun. She turned a gun on one of the fugitive slaves during the Underground Railroad trip before the Civil War. Apparently, he wanted to turn back, and she explained to him that turning back would mean a death sentence for the rest of the fugitives. It's like, what if you get caught? What if you don't make it? If you die, they're gonna find your body, they're gonna find us, they're gonna know our route, and it's gonna damage everything going forward. So I'm giving you an option. Either you keep going, or I'm gonna shoot you right here. I mean, she was like real serious about it. He wound up joining her and going to Canada. So I made a good choice.
A good choice was made that day, indeed.
Harriet did some pretty amazing things during this particular raid. Like I said, I'm going to keep this story for another time because we have more to talk about back in Philly. And now we're going to talk about the spookiness a little bit. It's a little bit of a spooky story. I would like to go here someday regardless, but at least now you know a little bit about Harriet. You know about the Underground Railroad. You know about how difficult it was getting back and forth. And this story also goes into a little bit more about the Fugitive Slave Act and how terrible it really was and what a pain in the ass it was for the North, trying to do the right thing. Belmont Mansion was the family home of the Peters dating back to 1742 when the land was purchased from, guess who?
George Washington.
No.
Wait. Could it be William Penn, the true father of America?
Yeah, like it's so funny when they're like, the land was purchased from William Penn. I'm like, yeah, like every other piece of land in this entire state. So William Peters was a lawyer, and he was also a management agent for the Penn family. The property was then passed to Judge Richard Peters, who had an impressive list of accomplishments and was also the first non-Quaker to become a member of the Pennsylvania Society for the Abolition of Slavery. Belmont Mansion is also the oldest Palladian-style mansion in the country. It's 360 years old. It's amazing. And it is a huge part of African American history in this in this state and really in the country. So like I said, Judge Peters was an abolitionist. And so this ties in with what we were discussing earlier about the Fugitive Act. One way that white abolitionists tried to get around the legalities of the act was to legally purchase slaves and allow them to work in an indentured servitude situation for a limited time, usually no more than 4 years. That way, they were legitimately working their way towards freedom and were less likely to have their freedom come into question. And this might sound just as terrible, but it was literally one of the only ways when this act was put into place that the North could get anything done. So let's say you're a rich white guy and you have the means to purchase slaves from the South or anyone else really, which means that you now have paperwork for each purchase you've made. And since the Southerners were all about property rights, none of them should have been able to refute that paperwork. A sale was a sale. Then the slaves would be legally transferred to the abolitionists, where they would work in homes as housekeepers, gardeners, etc. And most importantly, they would learn how to read and write, something that their former masters definitely did not want them to know. Their service was then rewarded with freedom and paperwork saying as such. And this would become extremely important when the North was faced with this Fugitive Act of 1850. It was one of the only ways a free black person could stay out of the clutches of the police and bounty hunters, yes, there were bounty hunters, was to have correct paperwork. And it helped even more if a prominent white man was also backing that evidence up with his own original invoice of purchase. It's absolutely insane, but it was the legal go-around to help keep free black people free. And then I'll give you guys some other numbers here because I know that people are going to question the indentured servitude thing, but I want to be thorough about it. In the U.S., 96% of all Englishmen entering Virginia during colonialism were indentured servants.
I do remember that in my history classes as a young lad as well. The difference of learning the difference between slaves and indentured servitudes. And most people, well, I don't want to say most, but a good portion of people that came from the old world to the new world, quotes around both those terms.
Yeah.
They were indentured servitudes or indentured servants. Yeah.
Yeah, 96.
And had to work.
Now in the North, though, you're talking about just New England in general, that number is only 2%.
Well, that's because that was more religious nuts.
No, actually, it has everything to do with that indentured servants came here to work on plantations, and they had to work a specific amount of time. It helped them get to the New World with no money, but indentured servants were problematic because they were tied to one property only. They were only working for a specific amount of time before moving on to build their own farm, and they were more expensive than black slaves.
And they had, they weren't permanent.
Right. Yes. So it could be said, though, that indentured servitude led to the increased need for slavery, and that Southern plantations were broken from the start, and without evolving, they were doomed to fail. And I'm sorry, but evolving doesn't mean, oh, we're not going to have all these white people working on our plantations anymore that we actually have to pay more money to. Now we're just going to, steal people. I'm sorry, let's use the correct term. We're just going to loot people from other countries and have them come here and work for nothing. That's cheaper, right? I mean, So yeah, I'm sorry. I don't like plantations. I don't even like their. I could get into that, but anyway, yeah. If you're having your wedding at a plantation in the South, just know it was built on the backs of black folks who are still getting the shaft. Okay, so back to Philly and Judge Peters. So in 1811, Peters purchases Cornelia Wells and her daughter from Thomas Morgan. Peters was a man who knew exactly how to manipulate the law in favor of black people. So her indenture was on record in Blockley Township, and her papers were all in order. Judge Peters knew that bounty hunters were always on the lookout to nab a black person north of the Mason-Dixon line, whether they were legal or not. Let that sink in though, because it still baffles me. Even if you've done everything right and you escape to the north by legal means, there's still men out there who are hired by Southerners to recapture and bring you back into slavery. Or, like I said, just bring you into slavery. You could have been born free here in Pennsylvania, and somebody could come grab you and just take you back, and then now you were free, and now you're a slave. It's totally disgusting. Anyway, so like I said before, Judge Peters also was against the Fugitive Slave Act of 1792. And he knew exactly how to manipulate the law in order to keep her free. And that's what he does. Before I tell you Cornelia's story and her life at Belmont, I will say this. Might come off of sounding like a white savior story. And I am not suggesting by any means that her happy story was the case for black folks trying to escape. And I understand why some people hate this concept of, the white savior comes in and saves everybody. But at least he was a good guy. And when I tell you about what the family continued to do for blacks in general, it was very ingenious, and I can't even, it's really, really cool. Anyway, so Cornelia, she becomes part of the household. Richard's wife had passed away, leaving his daughter to manage this huge estate. Belmont Mansion is, oh God, I want to say it was another like 500, 600 acre when it originally was bought. And that kind of like got whittled down over time, but it's still a huge estate to take care of. And it's not in this case that Richard was like, oh gosh, I need to hire somebody because my daughter is doing everything and I don't want to work at home. The guy legit, he was busy. He was a judge for the U.S. District Court. He was an abolitionist. He's trying to get prominent white men to change laws. He converted some of the estate into a working model farm to promote scientific agriculture because he was also an environmental scientist. So Cornelia is coming into this pretty awesome environment. She wound up helping Peter's daughter, Sally. When she was finished with her indentured servitude, Sally gave her an additional $30 after that, which, by the way, was only 3 years. Her servitude was only 3 years. And $30, okay, it's not a whole lot, but that was like $600 in buying power. But the thing is, Cornelia didn't go away. She didn't actually leave. She's then hired full time to continue her service with the Peters family, and she's getting paid $15 every 3 months. And then when her daughter Jane was able to actually work for the family, she too was also given a pay. So now she's completely free. No more indentured servitude. All of her paperwork is in order. She can go anywhere she wants because she's not worried about getting caught. She is making a living wage. Okay. Now, I did do some number crunching though, because $15 every 3 months still sounded pretty low to me for that time period. And it is technically, but at the time when she was getting paid that amount, she was still living at Belmont Mansion. So she was having all of her rent and food provided for her. So if I took that into consideration for what we would consider an unskilled worker at the time, she was making decent money to start putting away without having to pay rent or food money out. So she eventually moved into a small cottage near the river, which would have been, I believe, the Schuylkill River, because this later becomes part of Fairmount Park. Now she has her own little house. She's making her own living. Her daughter's living with her in this cute little cottage. She says that kids would give her extra pennies if they dug up worms from the garden to use as fishing, and that Judge Peters converted the surrounding area into orchards. And she eventually created a little tavern of her own to entertain guests who came out to the gardens. She made homemade horse-shaped ginger cakes and spruce beer, just like Harriet Tubman did. And now all I can think about is like I want ginger cakes and like root beer or spruce beer, like homemade.
Me too.
Yeah, so I thought that was very sweet. And now Belmont Mansion, I'm going to talk about this and a little bit of the spooky side of the mansion itself. And hopefully, when everything officially opens up again, I really want people to go out and see this place because it's really amazing and beautiful. And it has an interesting history of its own. I condensed this down into something that was like a little bit quicker. There's a lot of history in this one, guys. In 1986, the Belmont Mansion was on the city's demolition list. That's when Audrey Johnson-Thornton founded the American Women's Heritage Society, which was an African American women's organization dedicated to restoring and maintaining Belmont Mansion in Fairmount Park. Under her leadership, $3 million was raised to save and renovate the mansion. She assembled a team of Temple University graduate students to research the structure's past, and this is when the team found out that the mansion had been a very important stop on the Underground Railroad, which meant that it was an important chapter in African American history in Philadelphia specifically. Something else was discovered when Olivia Butler came to the mansion to do her dissertation on the structure, and this is in 1999. She was instrumental in uncovering that Richard's son, Richard Jr., was part of the design team that designed the Philadelphia Columbia Railroad that went through Fairmount Park at the time. It's believed that Richard Peters Jr. deliberately created a way for the train to slow down so that escaped slaves could jump to safety and be met with a conductor of the Underground Railroad. And I think that is just so awesome. Okay, we have all this extra legislation in place. We've got the federal government with these acts. We've got all this stuff going on. We're trying to get people. We're trying to save people. How else can we possibly get this done? Oh, well, if we sell off a portion of our land to finance the railroad, we now have direct control over a very small section of the railroad. And he designed it so that people could escape because if you look at how it came down on an incline, and then it had to take a pretty sharp turn to cross the Schuylkill right before it gets to the bridge. There's also a bridge there it looks like it's covered from the photographs. So I'm like, wow, the train doesn't have a choice. It has to slow down as it comes around that curve to cross over the bridge. And what better place for people to jump off? They're covered,
Yeah.
It was amazing. So I thought that was really cool. So when the Belmont reopens, you definitely need to go visit this house, and not just for the ghost, but for the important piece of African American history. So apparently, since the mansion was reinvigorated, the ghost of the judge has been felt in various parts of the house. This doesn't surprise me because, this land had been with the family since the 1700s. And it's interesting to note, though, that the museum has a docent program that's partnered with the Global Leadership Academy, and this is where students can go attend a 6-week program to become docents. It kind of made me wonder if you have the judge sort of checking in on things because he's super happy to see that the house is used to further the education of young Black women and other people too. So yeah, nothing very specific about the hauntings, just that his presence is often felt, or you just feel like someone's behind you. And there's been at least one time when a medium went in the house and came back saying that she felt that it was a male presence as well. So I'd be very interested in going in there and seeing if I feel anything myself.
Just walk into a wall and you'll feel something.
Yeah, no. So a quick addendum, though. Found this out while I was researching, obviously, but Audrey Johnston-Thornton died last year at the age of 93. Her legacy lives on, though, in this work that she accomplished at Belmont and her other volunteerism, including African American Chamber of Commerce, serving on Lincoln University's Board of Trustees, the Mayor's Commission for Women, and working with the Urban League of Philadelphia and the Philadelphia Orchestra Cultural Diversity Initiative. She was an amazing woman in her own right as well. And now Naomi Nelson is currently the curator and consultant for the Underground Railroad Museum located at the Belmont. And if you want to give to the museum, we'll provide that in the show notes, and I'll have some information on Instagram as well. All right, so this brings this session to a close. Thanks for listening, guys. Hopefully you learned something different today, something you didn't know from before, so that'd be great. And if you already knew all this stuff, hey, that's cool too. If you want to follow us on Twitter and Instagram, that'd be great. I've been tweeting a lot.
Just like several times a minute.
It's a lot of information.
There is a lot of information. That is true.
Whatever. We'll plug ourselves a little tiny bit here, but I do want to talk about something that happened. I should have led in with this, but so yeah, you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram. We have a Facebook. I honestly have not been using Facebook that much. It's just so whatever. It's just sitting there. You can go to our Patreon if you want to sign up. Great, that's helpful. It's still a bad time for a lot of people, and honestly, at this point, most of us have probably given to one of the many great causes to give to during hashtag Black Lives Matter. So that's cool. If you want to support us, great. But it's we'd almost rather you just support somebody else at this point that kind of needs it more than we do. We need to be very vigilant about this going into the future because this was the craziest thing I'd ever seen happen since I've been on Twitter or Instagram. Because we are a podcast, we were privy to some things that were going around being shared through the musical community as well as other podcasters. And the initial idea for Instagram specifically, it's all about looking at things on Instagram. The idea was that we go quote unquote dark as far as we're not going to promote ourselves. The instructions were very clear. Like, just don't promote yourself this today. It was supposed to be hashtag Blackout Tuesday, right? You were to promote Black businesses in your area, Black podcasters, Black musicians. Like, let's just inundate Instagram with as many Black positive things as we possibly can for this day and just not promote any of our stuff. And I was so excited about it because I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, because it kind of, I don't want to say force. It didn't force me to do it. I was very happy to do it. I learned about so many other artists in this area, musicians in this area, some of them we've already been in contact with, that in the coming episodes we're going to be featuring them too. It just sort of, I want to say, it lit a fire under me to really start looking at the fact that even we were not consciously doing it, but we had not been promoting Black podcasters, even though I listened to two of my favorite ones are, like I said, Black Girls Do Stuff and Legends from Africa, which is South Africa, and they do nothing but talk about legends. Awesome podcast. So I was like, why is it that we just, like I said, not intentional at all. So I was very excited about it. I wake up the next morning and I look at my Instagram and there is nothing but black squares, just emptiness, just nothing at all with the hashtags. Sometimes hashtag Black Lives Matter, sometimes no hashtags, and sometimes hashtag Blackout Tuesday. And I was like, what is going on? This is not the instructions that we were given. So I bump over to Twitter and I find out, and it was the first person who I saw on Twitter that this was being retweeted was from Feminista Jones. And she was like, I think her tweet says something like, I'm literally crying right now because you guys have literally blacked out Instagram because this was not what was supposed to happen. Apparently, white supremacists, whatever you want to call them, racist buttholes, they started giving out false information. A false narrative was created where it was now saying, in solidarity of Black folks, you should put this black square. It destroyed the movement in a matter of hours because you went from having all these wonderful photographs of the peaceful protests and of course photographs of police officers being really bad. I mean, it is what it is. It just went to nothing but black. And how was that helping anybody? How was that promoting anybody? Oh my God, it was so infuriating and so sad. And I just tried to tweet as many people as I could. I went on Instagrams. I was like, you got to take this down. This is what we're supposed to do. I even put our instructions up there. Like, this is what we were supposed to do, guys. Like, I couldn't believe. And yet I did. Then after reading Feminista Jones' take on it, it was just like, yeah, they copied and pasted most everything that you were told to do, but they just tweaked it just enough that it literally blacked out the entire movement for almost 24 hours. That's messed up, man. So we got to be really, really careful where we get instructions from when it comes to doing things through social media. Just be very vigilant. If you're an ally, be very vigilant that you're getting the correct information, that it's coming from a source that is black led, okay? Because not every white person's a good person. Not every white person's an ally. Just gonna say it. They're part of the problem.
I was very happy that I got the news to do Blackout Tuesday on Thursday. Because that's how much of social media I've been on lately. So.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, I was very hip to it. I will say, I heard, like, one of the things I saw was, we don't care if you're, making your whatever all black, you little square thing, but just don't use the hashtags. Keep the hashtags free so that, like, we can still communicate. So then people, from what I saw, there was a movement of people that started doing the black square thing, like hashtag all lives matter, to destroy that feed with just black squares. Which also the weapon of social media and how wonderful it can be used. Have you heard of the K-pop? Just everything that they've been doing, kind of since that the black or the black square. Everything a bunch of different groups have been doing to like white lives matter, all lives matter, all that kind of like those racist alt-right groups that you also use hashtag. They've been like putting furry stuff on just K-pop things.
Yeah.
Like they've just been flooding it with useless, totally not related things.
Yes.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah. Well, that was kind of like where it was suggested to use the hashtag MAGA and like put pictures of Colin Kaepernick. So I don't know if y'all noticed that or not, but Mission Spooky did do that. I put hashtag MAGA by allowing Colin Kaepernick to play in the NFL again with a picture of him throwing the ball. So it's like I really felt like doing that a lot more than I did because I am sort of a troll in a way.
Oh, I'm definitely a troll.
All right, guys, stay spooky and don't die. But if you do, contact us.
Via protests. Peaceful protest. If you want to get a little rowdy, I'm okay with it.